You're listening to Tune Dig, a conversation between two lifelong friends about the power of music, one album at a time. I'm Cliff Seal.
And I'm Kyle Stapleton. Each episode, we talk about a single album in depth, unpacking it through conversation to understand what makes it worth appreciating, and learning a little bit about life along the way.
If you're listening for the first time because we're covering an artist or a record you love, we promise you'll learn something new or gain a new perspective by the end of the episode.
And if you've stuck with us for multiple episodes, you know by now that you're bound to expand your horizons as we share clear entry points for artists you may never have tried to get into before.
Today we're talking about Phaedra by Tangerine Dream.
So we recently surprised ourselves by doing an episode of this podcast dedicated to the, Olivia Rodrigo release Sour. And we talked a lot about pop in its post-internet state. And it's just kind of a pool of influences that can be picked up at random because of what technology has done to popular music and influences and all of that. And Sour was a chance to see the accumulation of all of that reality, especially, and to throw in post-COVID, to throw in post a lot. Just a whole lot of stuff that we've been through, and how the meaning of what pop is and how to be surprised by it kind of takes a particular skill set at this point. In that same sense that pop sort of means this whole ass different thing than it used to mean. Electronic music is another thing that sort of has lost its meaning, especially, again, post-internet. Internet changed the way that especially dance music took off. Like, literally, there are studies about EDM music being spread like a social contagion. Like, it literally works differently in the way that people get excited about that music, the way that people get hooked onto it, and all that. So if Sour was our chance to see what happens when genres like pop and electronic get the whole internet piled on top of it, and we, accelerate 15 years down the road, what we get to do...
See an outcome.
Yeah, we get to see some of the outcomes, right? We see some of the probabilities and all the waves collapse into whatever reality has actually happened. Tangerine Dream, on the other hand, gives us kind of the whole inverse of the thing. Phaedra is like a time machine that lets you go back to the origins of the universe that are electronic music. Because even pre-internet, electronic music has lived like 1,000 lifetimes.
Yeah.
And to be honest, and to kind of call it out right here at the beginning, me and Kyle don't necessarily love those 1,000 lifetimes for the most part. Electronic music is sort of like, okay, in some sense.
I'm learning to love it or different pockets of it, and continually surprising myself that it's finding its way into my repertoire, but I'm not actively seeking it out as an idea.
Yeah.
So it's the post-internet thing that's bringing it to me. But yeah, you're right. It's not our natural mode for certain.
No. And primarily because you let me know if you disagree. But I think one entire hallway that we have shut off and has like escape room level doors closed on it is EDM.
Yeah.
Which, dude, if you love it and you love to be around people or whatever, go party. That's cool. When I talk about like music and the way I experience music, we are literally talking about different things.
Yeah. We're 12 years on since like dubstep, not UK dubstep, but like Skrillex dubstep sort of became a radical phenomenon overnight. Tumblr, I don't know, internet. And I remember having a moment. I went to a hip hop show. I thought you were there with me, but we've talked about this show a number of times, and I don't think you were. It was a hip hop show, a Def Jux hip hop show. It's like northeastern white rapper dudes. And the DJ between sets played a dubstep remix of My Own Summer by the Deftones. And I was like, culture has jumped the shark. Was my feeling at the moment. I feel differently about it now, but I just remember being like, I'm not prepared for where the world is headed.
And just to share my own intimate experience with the Skrillex moment, I was going to From First to Last shows when the dude who would be Skrillex was Sonny, the vocalist for a punk band who was actually really good.
Yeah.
And then I guess through what maybe he would call serendipity now, I don't really know. It's sad to me, but basically messed up his vocal cords, couldn't sing and tour as much, got really into this and became Skrillex. And then we started hearing Wild for the Night and stuff like that. And
I just always think of monsters and sprites, whatever. I think of that Spring Breakers trailer. And like that movie became one of my favorites because I was so primed by this dubstep song that had these weird neon dynamics, like hyper futurist. And over that dubstep track, they zoom in on Gucci Mane's face and the audio of him saying, "Y'all want to die tonight?" Spring break. And that was when dubstep started to turn the corner for me.
yeah.
But to your point, there are 1,000 rooms in the Electronic Music Museum, and it takes a minute now that there's so much, like so many things are electronic by definition, to be like, that's electronic music. Did you know? Do you like this? Please fill out the survey. Are you an electronic music fan
like
now?
we're down with hip hop. Hip hop definitely is a form of electronic music. Like
100%.
we're good. Yeah. That hallway is open.
Did not saddle up Project Pat to Tangerine Dream in my brain until this moment right now, but that's a great feeling. It's a real good feeling.
I think everybody in that circle likes smoking weed. Okay. So we're good. Tracing it even further back, I mean, it set EDM in its corner and its own, like there's plenty of phenomenon there to learn about and a lot of people who know a lot more about it. But, you know, then going back through hip hop and everything that happened through the 90s and through everything we've talked about with like A Tribe Called Quest and like learning how to sample things electronically and turning that into music. Even before that, right? There's new wave where electronic music like smashes into punk rock and in punk getting its own maturity level into the 80s and coming up with, you know, I mean, what would basically become pop for a good portion of that time. And then,
how did I get here?
And then dub, like we love dub. We talked about King Tubby and like there's so many lifetimes and branches and everything from electronic music that's already happened that are all worth exploring and that are all worth seeing. But this is one where it's kind of like, all right, you need to go back to the like Hall of Presidents. Okay. Like go back in this ride, in this tour, museum or whatever. Let's go back to the first moment where like they figured out how to launch a rocket out of the atmosphere type stuff, right? Like what were the origins of trying to get things off the ground? And Phaedra represents a really fascinating historical moment in what would like become electronic music. I don't even know if at that time what was being produced and being called the music that was going on Phaedra would have even made sense to call it like a form of music
right
at that point. Like maybe, and people were super into it, obviously, and this was a really cool art project, but it was just as much a science experiment with equipment that effectively didn't come with any manuals or like you couldn't go scour internet forums to find out how old people used sequencers. And like the whole story of Phaedra is basically showcasing a point in time where synthesizers, not only were they not the $20 Casio keyboard that we could get, 20 years later and do anything with. Like synths were so impossibly difficult to use that they required technical experts. And on top of that, which is like, I think the clincher of why it's worth like really honing in on this particular moment. Basically, scientists are making music with wild and very expensive equipment. And this is before electronic music ever really met a beat in a consequential way. Most of the rhythm that we're going to hear is not designed to be the rhythmic backing of what is overall conceived to be a song. Rhythm is like a externality of what's being created by synthesizers on whatever is being created into what gets called Phaedra. Like we can call it music to be shorthand, but something like pretty specifically different is happening on this record. And it's worth talking about and considering, I guess, what we can learn from it. And if you haven't just experienced some really specific ways of getting into this music, you should.
So I want you to talk about that because you shared that with me in the lead up to this episode, and that was helpful. If you're someone like me who tends toward the Stooges end of things, last episode I compared Olivia Rodrigo's songs a little bit, the first song anyway, to the Stooges. I'm more on the in and out, direct feeling, id. And this is maybe that in its own different way, but it's, to put it lovingly, a difficult record to just like sit down and pay attention to. So if it's not your natural mode to do classical, to do jazz, going to offer the same sort of like context warning that I do for people whose brains are wired like mine in similar situations. This is a record where I would encourage you to think about other moments where music or sound has opened a tiny portal to another world in your brain, like Neil deGrasse Tyson Cosmos style.
I want a Rick and Morty portal. It's a Rick and Morty portal now.
This was way before portal gun technology was invented, for absolute sure. So like if you're about our age and you grew up playing games like Legend of Zelda or Super Mario 64, and the music is integral to immersing you in the portion of that world or that map that you're in, like when that really started to become a thing, and now those songs get used on TikTok, but also for like sort of immersive associative moments. Or like if you're a Zeppelin fan and there's a long John Paul Jones Mellotron interlude, the organ is used in very similar ways on Phaedra to the ways that JPJ uses it as a texturizer in Zep music.
Yes.
Or we talk about the Mars Volta a lot. We invoke the Mars Volta a lot. If you see a band like them with a guitarist who's got a shit ton of pedals at his feet and he turns a knob during sound check and it does the like one of those, but you know what kind of musical experience you're about to get if the dude at the beginning of the set makes sure that he can turn the knob to full stoned on his guitar array. All of those things crack open a different part of the multiverse, and you can like see yourself in a new physical landscape. That is like so common now that it borders on insulting to try to like point out. But to your point, back then, so to speak, that was not necessarily as easy to do. I mean, it is sort of like a classical music approach to things, but handled in a new way with technology to evoke. And the thing I kept thinking about was that it was effortful innovation. Like it took a lot of work and persistence to like crack that portal open and hold it, so to speak, because of very real analog things that are easy to take for granted now because the machinery is so streamlined to create a sequence or whatever. So there are a couple of books that I would have loved to have read for this, but like they are out of print. They are not available as ebooks. You cannot find them. The best you can do is finding reviews of them or 2/3 portion of one of them on Google Books. There's a passage in one of them that said the synthesizers were very susceptible to shifting temperatures. And like thinking about the bleeding edge that they're on technologically, they paid $15,000 in early 1970s dollars of their advance to purchase the one piece of Moog equipment that would like be the thing for this. So like you're paying a price to be on the cutting edge, right? To suffer a little bit. So the synths were susceptible to shifting temperatures, could suddenly crash or drift out of key. So even after a sound check, the band would find themselves opening each show by retuning each piece of equipment individually until each synth was locked into the same precise frequency. Ironically, audiences mistook this level of concentration for indulgent aloofness, but the three musicians had to be confident that their equipment was operating at peak performance before they were confident enough to begin the show and give the audience what they had come to hear. Edgar, we'll talk about the sort of main dude at the heart of Tangerine Dream, Edgar Froese. His diaries made up this book, and it says the diaries go into fascinating detail as the band experimented in the studio with each new advance in electronic technology. And again, I felt a renewed respect for the patience and persistence of these musicians as they spent long hours trying to create new sounds and then find a way to merge them into music for the next album. So artistically, that's a conscious choice and a risk that can go horribly wrong. So I think one interesting inroad, other than the sounds themselves, is to think about the labor of love that brought them into the world. And it's because it's ethereal, because it lacks the driving, deliberate rhythm, it's very easy to take for granted or dismiss or think of as ambient, or just be like, I can get this shit into Bed Bath & Beyond. But like, they worked hard to make a scientific innovation. And when you think about the scientific method, it's boring. It's not sexy. It's not exciting, or, CSI forensics, or all cosmic. What's Iron Man's name in real life? Not Robert Downey Jr. Tony Stark. It's not like that. Most of the time, it's small and iterative and brutal. And the fact that they made a choice over their career, like, this is our thing, this is our angle. Okay, all right, respect. So that opened up a new sort of line of inquiry for me in thinking about this. It's like, it's real easy to make stuff that sounds like this now. It was not.
Yeah.
Then. So let's see you unearth a thing. Let's see you conjure a thing through maximum effort. Okay, now I'm intrigued. Let's begin.
But you got to catch yourself, because there's never been a better moment to say they're just in there turning knobs. Well, in a sense, yes.
Yes, and
then also, on the other hand, this is literally the least random music that's ever occurred. Okay, the whole concept of I just went into a studio and cranked out whatever, that palette does not fit on this story at all. Like that sheet cannot spread across this surface. They're incompatible truths. So, okay, let's talk about the labor of love then, because part of what makes this record interesting is, in fact, all of the details of what you have pointed out for maximal effort needed to create basically anything. So this entire album was recorded in less than 6 weeks, which I want to stop and say is not the way you think this is going to get summarized when you start hearing about what happened. 6 weeks is kind of a miracle based on what happened.
By contrast, the Olivia Rodrigo record took a little over a year, and I don't want to put them in direct comparison to each other too much, but we tend to think about these records in pairs. We try to record closely in pairs, and part of what makes this podcast interesting, I think, is contextualizing music against music that we or anyone else would not tend to, right? Like that's what keeps the spark alive, is you wear a different color sunglasses and everything on your commute looks a little different. That's what we're trying to do.
It's like musical debate club. If debate was just about loving and appreciating music and not constantly taking stances where you get to grandstand in front of other people.
Yeah, we're always looking for more and better. And it's always an appreciative inquiry framework. We're always trying to find more of the good thing in everything.
How could I defend this thing if I wanted to? Yeah. But also, we're not going to defend any indefensible stuff.
We are always trying to take the affirmative.
Yeah.
Unless it absolutely does not need an affirmative case.
Well, like if you want to see this at play.
30 Seconds to Mars.
Listen, we did a Kanye episode, okay? We carved this space, okay? And we spent that whole episode being like, I'm pretty convinced we need to draw a real hard line here.
Jesus, and that was like 4 years ago.
That's what I'm saying. Even then we were like, no. We know the way this is going. Okay.
It's got its own legalese, like buried in the audio track. Like, we reserve the right to not be held responsible for any current or future Kanye West iterations, forever in perpetuity. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So Phaedra was recorded in less than 6 weeks, with the first recording session taking place in November of 1973. Now, some of the music, which I like to point out here because then we can just kind of tell this part of the story, but some of the music was recorded with the help of Fruzy's wife, Monique. And so just hold on to that for a second, because when we talk about almost the dichotomy of this being extremely random and very not random, like music all at one time, noting the inclusion of this guy's wife is interesting because it kind of came out of nowhere, but was also kind of necessary. So Phaedra was this album where they talked about how everything had to be so structured to begin making the music, because they're using, again, a synthesizer well before our current conception of what that means, where we can just like throw tiny chips into small computers everywhere, right? So they were using a Moog sequencer, so driving bass notes, and they were using this for the first time. And at least as the legend goes, although it was hard to find a little bit more detail about this, they bought it from Keith Richards, is what I saw in a couple of places.
There's no way that's true.
I know, but I saw it just like offhand, and this was like
fake news.
Yeah. Speaking of things being out of time, like, all right, this seems like a thing that would pop up in a Facebook group somewhere. But it doesn't feel so weird when you find out that later, when David Bowie came to Berlin, this guy helped him find his apartment while hanging out with Iggy Pop. And the three of them are just hanging out in Berlin talking about music. So,
well, I did not know that, and that endears me to this whole thing greatly.
Right? Obviously, this guy was kind of cool to hang out with.
He was pretty juiced
to
in.
be getting Bowie and Iggy. Yeah.
Is it worth stepping back for just a second, like contextualizing them in this scene just a little bit? Like, okay, we're American dudes. That's our lens on everything. This came out in 73 at the end of the sort of like 67 to 71 psychedelic rock explosion. So that whole thing is happening. We've moved past Woodstock into full on Dead territory, but it's very organic. It's very LSD. At this point, we've gotten some Zeppelin, some Sabbath, a lot of blues based crunchy organic stuff. You move a little further east into Europe, and by 73, the electronic school that we talked about in the Can episode has proliferated, the Stockhausen school. So trying to contextualize it against sort of those two forces, I think, I don't know how much we talked about that in the Can episode, but just thinking of the sort of like global consciousness context, because it is very different from Can, but it's also very different from Hawkwind. It's very different than Kraftwerk, and it's very different from everything that's happening west of there, so to speak, from an international perspective.
Yeah, Tangerine Dream gets called Berlin School as a phrase, Berlin School as a subgenre of electronic music, and in at least a couple of places was described as an offshoot of krautrock and all of that stuff. So it's like extremely similar to but parallel to Can.
Right.
And to me, the easiest way to think about that is Can, and you can listen to the episode, or you can just literally listen to 30 seconds of Can to get the idea. But the whole Can thing...
Please listen to more than 30 seconds.
Yeah. Yes. But like Can and Kraftwerk and all, this is rhythm driving you into psychedelia.
Right.
It's the rhythm is pulling you, it's holding you, it's making the whole thing feel like a marathon. It's making you want to yell and run around and be on an ayahuasca trip, and like just that constant like sweaty exerting effort and all that stuff. Whereas this Berlin School stuff was more just the precursor of ambient music. Like this is like the Brian Eno music for airports type, like no. Setting aside the concept of a driving rhythm, then what happens if we just create space that doesn't have a BPM necessarily? Or if it does have a BPM, it's incidental and temporary. It pops up, which is...
Just call it a vibe.
We'll get into that some about like good ways to listen to this, but like that's kind of one really interesting way to think about it, because instead of in a traditional or a modern song structure where beat is presented to you as a pretext for the song, it's your earliest hint at what it's going to feel like, what's contained within the song. It's sort of like the biggest package of information you've got about it. In this type of music with Tangerine Dream and with ambient music, the whole point is that you don't get that info ahead of time. It's just whatever world is going to get built while you're on the inside of it. And then as the synth pops up, well, you'll hear rhythm associated with it, but that rhythm doesn't carry on. It doesn't necessarily associate it with the next time you hear a beat or anything rhythmic. So you have to have a different relationship to what beat means. And that's both, I think, difficult for us as American music listeners in our current moment in time, and also just like a worthwhile challenge to us because, in a sense, and I think we'll talk about how to do this more, but to me, you get an exercise that's similar to listening to drone or noise when you really do appreciate those genres of music in the way that they can become meditative. Because the whole thing about feeling meditative is the only thing you can hear now is your breathing, right? Your breathing is now the rhythm, but you start to understand that as you pay attention to your breathing, if you start to try to keep your breathing on rhythm, you've lost it, right? And so that's ambient music. That's experiencing this, whether you end up liking it or not. Whether you turn this on the next time you go to do focus work or not is sort of beside the point. Like, we want you to be able to not only know music history by hearing cool stuff like this, but secondly, be able to attune your person to the way that certain music needs to be experienced to better hear it and experience it, and, for lack of a better term, critique it. Like, to be able to say, here's what I just experienced. How can I connect it to the artists who came after them? How can I understand what was interesting about this as opposed to just being a weird artifact of history? Like, what parts of Phaedra are interesting music as opposed to just being fascinating tidbits of a story? Like, that's a whole different way to approach music that you can really only do with this type of stuff with ambient music. And it's something that makes all of this worth exploring, especially in the context of all the other records we talked about this season, most of which are extremely rhythmically involved.
Right. That's right. I think it helps for someone like me to contrast it to, so a lot of what you're getting at is, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, I listen to it and objectively, I'm just not sure what's happening. Right. And it gives you that feeling like when you walk into an art museum and you're looking at the pieces and you're like, what does this mean? What is this supposed to mean? Like, there's one objective sort of source of truth with it. And that's why I think music like this can be alienating. It's like, it's not meant to do an objective thing. And what you're getting at is exactly right. Is like, if you think about anything objectively, think about how it connects to other things that you like, which is what I was getting at with the video game music portal thing. Or think about, like, try to express how it makes you feel, what images it evokes for you. To try to like get it is to almost miss the point entirely. And I feel reassured or reinforced in that, in knowing how this music was made, knowing that there wasn't like a necessary grand artistic intent, right? And the sort of like austerity and artfulness and intellect of it being German electronic school elevates that tendency to be like, there's a capital T thing that I need to get. But truly, these dudes were like, we listened to a bunch of Pink Floyd when we first got together and loved to just listen to Pink Floyd for long stretches of time and smoke weed together. And it started as somebody pressed a button or turned a knob and got a sequence going on one of these machines. And somebody else was like, that sounds cool. Keep doing that. And I'll add my thing to that thing. And it was just like, with Phaedra, you can do that same thing. It's just, that is a cool sound. Literally just start at the basest possible level of music appreciation. Just be like, that's a cool sound. I will wait for the next cool sound to come and be layered on top of it or interact with it. Like, one of my favorite parts of Phaedra is when two layers are in phase with each other. They're rhythmically locked in, and then they start to phase out and they're at different BPMs or whatever. And you're like, oh, it's fucking up. It's breaking right now. But it sounds really cool, and it pulls you back in. When it gets really in sequence and harmonized, you can pull back away from it and just sort of vibe. But then there are moments where things like that happen, where it brings you back into focus on like a long 10-hour YouTube slow train ride video where nothing's happening. And then you're like, oh yeah, I still got that playing. And you look up and they're like passing a sunset on the right or something. It's totally a meditative thing. And I think this is another one of those episodes where we're like, use music as a corollary for your larger life to raise your awareness and be a more present meditative person. Because that's one of the best things that music has helped us do as human beings, like brought us more into awareness of the present moment. And you have helped me a great deal through showing me things like this, not specifically Tangerine Dream, but other things like it. And this one's a little different. And I love this one specifically because of the cosmic implications. Like, none of the other ambient, like Augustus Pablo, Sun, Can, whatever, all very earthbound, maybe air, certainly not all the way out into outer space. But this is a space thing. This is fucking space rock, dude.
Actually, space music itself is a really interesting detour that we should go ahead in this episode and put a little cul-de-sac on so that we don't go all the way down this road. Because down that road leads to Sun Ra, and we could spend a whole lot of time there because he was using the term space music back in the 50s to talk about the idea of being able to translate the experience of the void of space into a language that would allow people to both understand it and enjoy that sensation of being in the void of space.
The music is different here. The vibrations are different. Not like Planet Rave. Planet Rave's sound of guns, anger, frustration. There was no one to talk to from Planet Rave to understand. We set up a colony for black people here. See what they can do on the planet all their own without any white people there. They could drink in the beauty of this planet. Would affect their vibrations for the better, of course. Another place in the universe, up under different stars. That would be where the altered destiny would come in. Equation-wise, the first thing to do is to consider time as officially ended.
Phaedra is a very good exercise for that mindfulness practice of noting. Like, there is no template for prediction for what's coming up in the song. Again, the same way that usually a combination of the beat and the key of the song gives you when you are thinking about music. None of that is real here. This is a lot more like field recordings and stuff. But, well, here we are saying, here's how to take field recordings seriously. Spent too much time in the Brooklyn of my brain, and now we're going to talk about how to enjoy sounds.
But you got to bring your voice down like this today on This American Life.
I cannot do like a David Attenborough impression. This music is not for every moment. It's not for every person, and it's definitely not for every moment of every person. But being able to get in touch with that idea of shifting into...
We're not trying to be exclusive when we say that.
Yeah.
By the way, if you're not into it, that's fine. That's great. But if you're interested...
Yeah, we're going to teach you how to get into it if you could be into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you would like to be, maybe.
Yeah. It is a really good skill. And honestly, it's a good skill that translates into, to me, it feels similar to watching like movies that don't have soundtracks. I know it's different in the sense of, you can be carried away with the story and you don't necessarily have to have that music to go along with it. But the sensation of noticing that there's emptiness in what you're listening to and feeling how intensely you're applying your attention to not that many things to project it against, like that feeling is something you have to get familiar with and comfortable inside of Phaedra specifically. Like one description of the title track, for instance, from Mark Pendergrast was, at over 17 minutes, it conveyed the feelings of the cosmos, of giant suns exploding, of huge ocean movements, of mythological lands, of eddies and drifts, layer upon layer of futuristic sounds piled one on top of the other until the whole thing climaxes into some interstellar void.
I got a similar one. The sidelong title track is a high watermark in electronic music, a tone poem for the postmodern age that could have come from the pages of Fantastic Journey, so equally intimate and alien in its effect. The piece begins as an amorphous cloud of energy, like a star in infancy, before heartbeat-like rhythms draw the listener along a path peopled by alien shapes that proceed from and recede again into the blackness. This is brilliant stuff. More than just music, you can synchronize your lava lamp too. And I was like, damn, I need to get some lava lamps.
Kyle has been reading Styx lyrics for the last 2 minutes straight. Man. So if you can stick with this idea long enough to go, all right, yeah, I'm here for an audio explanation of the void of space. Let's go. Because actually, it's kind of tight if you know how to do it. I think we should talk about two things that contribute to that. So I know that we started to talk about the story of making the record, but let's come back to that and let's keep pushing into this like how to experience it thing. And then in my own experience, after learning how to appreciate the like whale sounds equivalent of music,
that's the second time this season. Tangerine Dream is like Meshuggah. And then they both. Well, really, every episode is just going to be a call for you to go find a vinyl copy of Songs of the Humpback Whale.
If you liked the bird sounds at the beginning of Freebird, but were wishing that none of the other music was behind it, this moment is for you.
If you take away the music part, Skinner is just a field recording on the Swamp Lake in Jacksonville, Florida.
But not only is it potentially difficult to get into, but even if you are open-minded enough in the right direction to feel ready to listen to Phaedra or whatever, actually doing the thing of listening to it is hard. And I think it's hard for two reasons. One is that it's one thing to sit and actively listen to like a jazz record, because here's the thing. If someone knew what you were listening to while you were sitting quietly in the corner and you're listening to Miles Davis, well, Kyle was over in the corner quietly listening to Miles Davis. I mean, that's a cool fucking sentence, right? If you're doing that and somebody peels off your headphones and you're listening to Phaedra, people are going to wonder what else is going on for you. Are you very sad? Are you very high? Are you very tired? Like, are you doing that thing where you're sleeping with your eyes open?
Are there edibles available near this Starbucks?
Like, because it doesn't feel like there's enough to attach your full active attention to. I think.
Are you working on a screenplay? And if so, was it optioned by A24?
Being John Malkovich, the music. So on top of, I think, like the meta sensation of realizing how much you're trying to pay attention to in that moment. Secondly, it's just like life just doesn't quite present you with great opportunities to do that in a reasonable way unless you know how to identify them. And as a person who has spent a long time specifically identifying opportunities in life to listen to really particular bits of music, I've got some ideas, because like active listening can be really hard with rhythmless music, and especially when an unknown amount of us are experiencing ADHD. We will never go back to understanding how many of us are actually experiencing a diagnosable form of that, because TikTok has happened. And we're all just in this mush of like, oh God, we're not interested in anything anymore, are we? And just everyone's experiencing the inability to focus on anything. So
you can't just go around the room and say you have this diagnosis.
Right.
I love lamp.
So looking for specific moments where you've got something mindless to do and you can swap this out for, here's the key I want you to think about. Swap this out for any moment where you'd usually pull out your phone as like last moment avoidance of the boredom that you're about to run full into. Okay. So like moments where you can't get anything going, you can't be on the phone really, like you can't be on a call, can't be immersed in a thing, but you know you're bored, you got to wait something out, right? This is the perfect moment for this. Okay. Like save this record for that. So like anytime you're commuting solo, I know that has kind of changed for everybody, but like if you're even taking a long like Uber or Lyft ride or something like that, if you are riding on the train, if you are, especially like this is a really key and specific moment for me, but the time between when you have to get in line to board an airplane and then the time when you can like get to all of your stuff after the plane has reached altitude or whatever is like a mishmash of awkwardness for everybody. And you're doing that thing where like you have to sit down on the plane when everybody else walks past you. And like, if you do a bunch of stuff, everyone's looking at what you're doing. Here's my Libra coming out all the way. I don't look at my screen. I want some privacy on this tube that we're all packed into.
I have never thought about my airplane boarding experience this extensively. It's normally like, how quickly can I get to my seat and just not do anything?
Welcome to my brain.
So this is perfect. Something like this is perfect for me. Yeah.
It really is perfect for that because it gives you this moment to sit and just like, if you want to just stare blankly into the abyss in front of you,
please do.
Actually, this is a great soundtrack for that, right? Because it gives you a real spatial feel because of the way that they are creating textures.
It's the abyss calling back to you, but like
feel
in a nice
my
way.
Embrace. Yeah. So don't attempt to go driving and like rock Phaedra. I mean, like you can, dude, but like it's not gonna. It's not enough. It doesn't overlap in the right ways. It's like. You know how we learned how to make little clay pots when we were kids and we had to learn how to score the sides of the clay that we needed to mash together because otherwise they would just slip back and forth. It's sort of like you've got to find the right moments to attach to something like this. And when you do, it works.
Remember that the Josh Homme guitar moves when he's like, to show you the Hendrix move, I got to play around it to get to the thing.
Yeah.
The equivalent that might work, that has worked for me, is to put the 4 tracks of Phaedra in a playlist with other things around it. So take 30 minutes of whatever music you like that'll just like make you tune out, or even talking. Put a podcast, 30 minutes of a podcast in front of it on a playlist and get yourself like not concentrating on it. That's okay, I am in the car. I have reversed the car. I am putting on Phaedra and turning it up and I am driving and vibing out to Phaedra now. It's like, no, you very much are not.
Yep. If you think to yourself, I am vibing out to Phaedra,
no,
whoa.
No.
Make a turn.
Stop the tape. So whatever gets you into your state of relaxation a little bit, you kind of got to trick your brain into getting there. To maximize your enjoyment, you have to minimize your attention a little bit. So whatever gets you there, try that. I mean, certainly you can try the running full steam into the cosmic brick wall of Phaedra approach first. But then if you're like, that didn't do it, but I'm still interested, then you can try the, little bit to get into the hot tub for 20 minutes before you attempt to relax your shoulders.
Finding a place to integrate it when you don't have to work so hard to be able to focus on it is a good way to just kind of intro yourself to this so it becomes loosely familiar. Because I think we've talked about this, especially with like Sun Records and Meshuggah, like extremely droney type music, where I know both of those examples are very different ways to introduce that drone, but that like the way that you can start to experience an openness to the cadence of whatever you're listening to and getting yourself like wrapped up in, it can be real hard to like slam into what Phaedra asks you to do, because unlike Sun, for instance, even though that's drone, at least it's loud. At least you crank it up and all of a sudden like you're feeling something. Phaedra is going to require more lightness from you, because if you put too much intention into it, it's not going to meet you with enough raw material. Whereas if you can get a little bit familiar with it so that not everything is like feeling like a surprise anime dolphin coming out of left field type thing, and you start to just know like the general tones and especially like the shape of the EQ. I don't really know how to say this, but like it's a brighter type of music than you usually expect from something ambient. So I think just 1 or 2 quick introductions to it softens that experience a bit so you're not as surprised. Then if you want to dig in straight up, I hate myself for talking about using technology like this, but if you've got AirPods or anything else that can spatialize stereo, you have found the record that will help you understand why that is cool technology. Because generally speaking, I really don't want technology trying to get in there and change a stereo mix from a professional.
Right.
Okay. I'm very serious about that. I want to hear it the way that the producer and the mastering folks wanted me to hear it generally. With this, first of all, there is no level of someone took the mastering super seriously like that and need you to hear it in a certain way. In fact, I think there was even an accident with the mastering we might mention. But what's happening here instead is
we're not going to come back to it.
Okay.
So it's that we read that the second half of the record was mastered backwards, which I don't know what that means. I don't. So do with that information what you will.
And we don't bring things up often when we do this podcast, and then we're like, and we don't know what that means. Because we tried to figure out what it means.
Absolutely.
And we
right.
for real can't figure out what it means, but we saw a bunch of people reference it.
But nobody explained it.
Right.
So music people
Yeah.
who produce music, engineer music for a living, please DM us and just give us a sense of that. We'll share it in the tweet thread.
Whatever this spatialized stereo feature does for like AirPods in particular, I think with certain Apple devices where it really does attempt to create a kind of like virtual form of Dolby Atmos type stuff where they're literally, creating more space in the sound. This works really well in headphones, but it creates a sensation of distance and it creates almost a tactile sense of this record in a way that I think helps you hear this record better, because it gives this little bit of shape and texture to all of the different pieces that kind of like pop up as part of a sequence that you could really only see if you were one of these people who were literally sequencing it as like a series of kind of almost zeros and ones, or like on and off little dots on a matrix, which is the way that this music effectively got written. That combined with experimentation on top of it. And so like this is a really cool moment to actually use a little bit of technology to help you get inside of things. And I will say I did literally spend time sitting, doing nothing except controlling my breathing, listening to this with like spatialized stereo turned on. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Like it helps, I think, for me, it sort of takes the edge off of the intensity of meditation. It's bringing me just a little bit further out to where I'm not totally losing track with where I am, but I'm able to really stop and just kind of go like, that sound was neat. Do that little thing on the inside where like, oh, that was fun. What just happened?
So it's very easy to talk about the whole album in the abstract in that way. And then you go to look for moments within it and you're like, I don't quite know what I'm reaching for here. I also was not sitting still when I did that. At that, you were like, ooh, spatialized sound. Like, sent me the message. So I did that. I was like up and doing stuff around the house. The moment for me where I was like, oh, that's cool, was mysterious semblance of something nightmare.
At the Strand of Nightmares.
Oh my God. Good on y'all. Nicely done with the title. The last 2 or 3 minutes of that 9-minute track, I'm going to be very unscientific in the way that I describe the sounds. There's like a warble sequence up in the sort of top treble range, and that starts to sort of like kaleidoscope out, and then the bass melody comes in and becomes the main thing and oscillates in the low frequencies, and then the warble comes back, and then the whole thing dissolves into ambience. If you've ever seen a spirograph, you know, the thing where you put your pen in one dot of the thing and it makes a circle pattern, it's like it does that, but think of it vertically around your body. So like going from top to bottom in rotation, creating a colorful pattern around you, which is, it sounds insane to try to describe in words, but if you listen to Mysterious Semblance and you like dial in toward the end of that track, that's a specific example where you can be like, whoa.
Yeah.
That's the lava lamp thing that we were getting at a little bit.
Yeah, for me, the illustration would be, it's like if you're in the movie Inception when they're doing all the crazy bendy stuff, but what if you were sitting down on the street and it was fine? You're just like, whoa, bro, check that out. And you're just kind of sitting there, with your
it was
with
all
your legs
far enough
crossed.
away that you weren't worried about any of it folding in on you.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Like your little square of road
good.
was stable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everything was bending around you. And you didn't need to know what level of dream you were in. You
Right.
could just snap out of any of them. You were
Right.
fine. Yeah, it all feels that way. And it's at the very least, even if you give everything an earnest effort, you're still like, listen, this is boring as shit. Okay? This fine. You've still really developed a skill that's helpful. Being able to recognize these moments and go, okay, what do I usually rely on to bring me into this thought? So like with a song, again, it's usually a beat, a key, something that we've like learned to attach to our concept of music or songs or whatever. And they just become shorthands for us to engage with it quickly. Like we don't think of all of that as Western anymore. We don't think of the scales in our music as having less notes than Eastern forms of music.
Mm-hmm.
They're just the thing that we experience, that we kind of apply to everything. And then we have trouble, seeing other forms of music through that lens, kind of like you brought up earlier. This is a good skill set to be able to have for pretty much anything, where you know that someone cares about the art that they've created and the outcome that they've made. You can stop and go, all right, where's the right level of like mental fidelity for me to engage with this? And Phaedra gives you a chance to go all the way back when you don't understand a thing at all. When something doesn't make sense or an experience doesn't make sense, or you need to just like, therapy's not even helping at this point. You need to rescind and find out what's going on the inside. Like stepping back further until you don't have that kind of rhythm and tone sitting on top of everything and letting yourself be open to it and just hearing what's there. Like, I think that that's a really great skill. And just to like drive this point home, I think it gives you the ability to appreciate when and how people care about the thing that you're experiencing. So that's why, like, I want to come back to how much work went into this, because like, if you can sit and appreciate it even a little bit, then you can connect with how hard people worked to make those little sounds that you just sat and noted. So we talked about that it was a small miracle that this thing was recorded in less than 6 weeks based on the story itself. And that one little tidbit to keep in mind is that Frozie's wife, Monique, ended up helping. So Frozie starts recording Phaedra and talked about how everything had to be structured because everything was so hard. So he said the reason that things had to be so structured while we were recording this is that we were using the new Moog synthesizer or sequencer that we mentioned for the first time. Just tuning it took several hours a day because at the time there were no presets and no memory banks. So let's call out how much is contained just in that sentence already. First of all, the concept of tuning an electronic instrument sounds ridiculous, right? There's not even a reason to go all the way into what that even means, other than think of these more as like scientific calibration instruments before the calibration was finalized and then got baked into everything else. Like people are like scanning radio frequencies for things here. So think of it a little bit more like that, where people are having to discover how to make the sequencer make the thing that they want to make.
The same way that the early computer data storage was the like scantrons with the Morse code things on them.
Yeah.
And you just ran a bunch of those sheets of paper through it
Exactly.
to generate and store and change data. That was before they figured out how to actually store it on a board, which is like,
Yeah.
it's the longer you sit and think about just that one thing, it's a Herculean feat of human innovation.
And so using your example, in that day when computer programming is basically like a piece of paper, like a long sheet of paper, if someone had asked you, where is the program, you would have pointed to a pile of paper.
Right.
Whereas now that doesn't make any sense. Programs are containers that live inside of computers, right? So similarly, that's how you can think about how rudimentary all this stuff was. Like the tuning of the synthesizer was not yet a container that could sit inside of a computer. It was a thing that had to be done from scratch every day because it couldn't be saved even once it was calibrated.
Yeah. Remember before you could do save game in a video game? Those were the days.
Oh, that's brutal. So he said, we worked from 11 o'clock in the morning every day to 2 o'clock at night. By the 11th day, we barely had 6 minutes of music on tape.
I read that and I was like, oh my
Okay.
God.
So that's why hearing that the whole thing was recorded in less than 6 weeks is wild. Okay. And then he says, this is a quote. I love this quote. Technically, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Okay. So this is not like a law of technology. This is someone literally describing their experience with a synthesizer. And he said, so the tape machine broke down. There were repeated mixing console failures. The speakers were damaged because of the unusually low frequencies of the bass notes coming out of the sequencer. So he said, after 12 days of this...
Paying a tax for innovation.
Yeah, exactly. So they're 11, 12 days deep into doing the same process every day to barely crank out, at this point, based on that math, they're cranking out about 30 seconds of music a day. Okay? And this is an ambient band, right? Who wants to make a long soundscape. So he said after 12...
I mean, that's like stop motion, claymation level. Brutal.
Yeah. Oh man, claymation is tight. Can't wait for Christmas, bro. Anyway, he says, all right, here's where we remember they're German. After 12 days of this, we were completely knackered. I'm going to assume they were tired of doing things after 12 days. But so he said, fortunately, after a 2-day break in the countryside, a new start brought a breakthrough. So the track Mysterious Semblance was recorded on December 4th. So that was a little, what was that, about a week and a half, 2 weeks after they had started. So he was saying that Pete and Chris, two of the other folks in Tangerine Dream, were asleep after a long day's recording. And so he invited his wife, Monique, into the studio, called in the studio engineer, and recorded the track Mysterious Semblance in one take on a double keyboarded Mellotron while Monique, his wife, quote, turned the knobs on a phasing device. This piece on the record is exactly as it was recorded that day. And he says, and this practice was to continue for the rest of the session. So whatever he's describing there about how they were able to reapproach the music, either by, I guess, finding whoever was awake, calling in the engineer, using a Mellotron and combining it with a phasing device, or whatever that meant for their process, that shifted the way that they could record the rest of the record, such that they were able to then go on to record everything else on Phaedra in less than the remaining 6 weeks.
Exponential measure twice, cut once. Just so much measurement with the tuning and like losing 2 weeks to just holding onto the ropes, basically. That Mysterious Semblance anecdote felt a lot like, to me, evoked the feeling of like everybody having to hold on to the ropes and the thing on a ship to just like get it over a big storm wave. And then you're exhausted and you're like, oh, but there's all these other waves to get to the next shore. Again, that level of effort is unbelievable.
Yeah. And it turns out, flipping back then to the title track of Phaedra. So this was originally based on an improvisation that was recorded in the studio, but exhibits basically one of the limitations of the equipment that was used at the time. To your analogy, Kyle, here of like people holding the ropes and trying to hold things back. So we've already talked about some super weird concepts that are weird to get across in podcasts, such as like what a container of a thing that fits inside of a computer even means. So using the analogy then of like everyone kind of holding the ropes to bring in a ship, or, holding the Woody Woodpecker float in the Macy's Day Parade. So think about the imperfection of that, okay? Yes, we are going to keep the ship from going away, or the balloon from floating away. We're going to keep it from going down the wrong street or running into the building. But you're not keeping it in exact confined space, right? The whole goal is to just basically survive. And so the title track showcases the way that analogy maps to the actual tuning of the equipment that was being used. Because as the equipment warmed up that was used to record Phaedra, some of the oscillators would begin to detune because they were temperature sensitive. And so this limitation was responsible for some of the changes in the music towards the end of the piece, effectively because over the course of the piece of music that is Phaedra, people had to manually, in real time, try to keep the instruments from going out of tune. And it was so difficult to do that it, in fact, was impossible for these experts to achieve during one song. And so what you actually hear is not only the Herculean effort of trying to keep music in tune, but also the failure of experts to do so, and therefore its impact on how music sounds itself. Like, we are deep in this shit, man.
Yeah, I took a guitar class in college, and I've told you this story. Took it with our buddy John Asante, who's in the podcasting space, and our professor played "Since I've Been Loving You" by Led Zeppelin, and pointed out that Jimmy Page played so hard and bent the strings so hard that by the end of the song, the strings had come out of tune. So that's why it's difficult to replicate the playing on "Since I've Been Loving You," sort of in the same way it's difficult to sing a Frank Sinatra song like Frank Sinatra, because there are just weird physical vibrational limitations that happen when people talk about accidents in the studio. This is as prime an example as you're ever going to get. It's just, you can't plan to do that, but when it happens, it leads to something cool.
Or even we talked about on the Meshuggah episode that when they were recording Catch 33, that they were trying to use 8-string guitars that weren't ready from the factory. So they had someone retrofit a 7-string guitar to play with the caliber or the gauge of strings that they wanted on 8-string. But because the neck isn't long enough, the guitars would detune themselves during the song. So Meshuggah had a combination of having to record, small bits of it to keep the song from going out of tune, but the song itself would slowly, on a minimal level, be constantly going out of tune, which again fits Meshuggah, but ties into this larger sense of just like, this is why we think this is like a museum, for lack of a better term, a planetarium of things to experience sonically, made by musicians. Like, this is loosely related to music in the sense that we're going to call it that. It's got a lot of differences, but it's such a fascinating moment to like click into, to see musicians using scientific equipment to the best of their ability to produce what they think might be an outcome of listenable music without any rhythm at all. I mean, that, if you are a person who is, I think, like us, it would be fair to say, enamored by the inexplicable magic of music, just like the language that seems to exist in our reality without proper explanation. Like, this is an extreme microscope. This is just like sending you all the way into these little moments of just like, look at all of the possibilities that come out of nowhere when you're just trying to keep things in tune, touching dials, inviting people to come just help you get a thing recorded. And then this thing that's a live improvisation, which is basically, 4 people in a German studio just like holding a machine into submission, becomes the foundation of the future of electronic music. Like, the impact of this random set of sequences and knobs and dials has an untold amount of impact on everything that we listen to now, including EDM, including hip hop, including dub, reggae, like new wave, all of this kind of stuff. And it's such an interesting moment to be able to go back and kind of feel the moments in human history like this and feel related to it. And to me, that's the sort of thing you can get into in the context you can shift into when you just let yourself sit down and breathe and sort of let this thing come to you. And you can feel yourself being a little bit of like, okay, so like, if I was feeling good and was in a studio and had access to $150,000 Moog, like, here's what I might do. I might also want that soundscape to appear there, and it becomes like a playful thing that's really interesting to experience.
The place that I brought it back to, and we talked about this before we started recording, is thinking about now. What's the now equivalent of Tangerine Dream? And on this podcast and in our lives, we've touched so many different genres, like seeking out almost drug, like the next high of what's a thing that I haven't experienced yet, with dub or Rihanna or Sunhouse or Bjork or John Coltrane. All of these inputs from all of these places, people trying daring things and new types of expression. This was a truly unknown. And I texted you and I was like, this makes me wonder what genres there still are that don't exist, right? What do we not know that purely by effortful brute force innovation are going to be a new and cool thing? And we joke about dubstep because it's trying to stumble toward new things. But to the point that you just made of like, if you had the equipment and the time to go in and experiment and just make pure noise, I think one of the things that's the most exciting about electronic music and all of the takeaways, like spiritually, creatively from Tangerine Dream, is the accessibility of it. Yes, they were electronics experts and they had a PhD level scientific qualification to mess with this stuff. But also, there's a Mini Moog app for iPhone that you can download and start messing around with knobs and keys and tones and phasers and effects and plugins and whatever. And it's overcome a lot of those, no presets, no saves, getting out of tune because of physical heat things. And it's just there for anyone. And so I hope there's one 14-year-old or 74-year-old who stumbles across this podcast and is like, I want to express something. I want to try. I want to take a painting class. I want to do a whatever. Hopefully one of the lessons of Tangerine Dream, I think, is I'll download the Mini Moog app and I'll start messing around with the sounds and saving them. And maybe I'll upload one to SoundCloud and we'll go from there. I hope that you can get from a place like I am a little bit invigorated even to go from a place of trying to experience it and being in the cosmic space and appreciating it as a listener to being encouraged to create sort of on my own volition. So I'm grateful for that.
Go to tunedig.com for your chance to win a free vinyl copy of the album we just covered. And follow us on Instagram and Twitter for even more info about the album, including playlists, links to interesting articles and videos, and even some stories that didn't make the episode. Most importantly, though, please support your favorite local record store or concert venue or buy merch from a band you love. Thanks for listening.